Well, when it comes to working with a customer, and again, whether that customer is internal or external or whoever it is,
Yeah.
it's always that what they should be bringing to the table is what problems they want solved. And they don't need to understand the solutions. They don't need to understand exactly the how that this is going to happen. Really, what's important is you work with them to really draw out what are the problems that they try to solve. The other
GTM AI podcast with Jonathan Moss and Coach K, where you get the latest with AI and GTM today.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is for you listening. It is I, Coach K, and this is the GTM AI podcast. I am super excited to have on a specialist in this world of AI and actually getting things executed and implemented, Reuben Bailon. How are you, sir?
Doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Good. I appreciate your patience because I'll probably edit this out, but you were very kind in waiting for me to do your name correctly.
Like I said, I'm not even going to try for your last name.
I know, it's just how it goes, but that's okay. First off, thank you so much for coming. I know you've been in the AI space for a while and you have a large background in not just Gen AI, but a ton of other places, or I shouldn't say places, but focuses within the AI realm. And I know there's a ton we could dive into, which we will. But before we do, I want to know a little bit more about you. So if you don't mind, enlighten us on your position now with Invisible, and more so like your journey of how you even got here through whether you want, if you want to share something personally or not, it's up to you, but more of like how you find yourself here and what kind of led you here and why you like doing what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. So when I was in high school and college, I had a lot of different jobs and a lot of different industries. And across the board, whenever I was working with a particular tool, I always just wanted more intelligence in the tool. That was just my expectation. That's what I wanted. That's something that I was really passionate about. And so it organically fell into the space of AI from just really wanting intelligence in the tools. And so initially started in computer vision, where if you think about Amazon, for example, if you look at the web page when they first launched, it's pretty horrendous. Customer experience, not that great. But if you could bring that same level of analytics online or from online to offline, then you would be able to make a much better experience offline, say in a retail store or in a hotel or wherever that you were. And initially joined a business that was actually focused on that problem. And so we were bringing this like online type analytics to the in-person experience, in-person interactions. And that was it was a pretty interesting technology because it had both a hardware and a software component. And so I'm very happy to say that in this part of my career, I'm actually more focused on the software side because that's actually much easier. From computer vision, we were gathering so much data that it inevitably led to machine learning. And from there, I actually spent the next few years of my career really focused on the machine vision side or the machine learning side of things, as well as optimization engines that can really help leverage the data that you're able to attain and able to gather. And now, of course, we're more in the generative AI space where you can actually start to combine all these technologies and use generative AI to get even more insights, even more automation from all the information that you have, all the data that you have. And also you have that as a user interface. And so you actually helps with the adoption side as well. And so you're starting to see a lot more use of some of these more intelligent tools that might have had an adoption curve before. Now you're seeing a lot less of that. Adoption's easier, use cases are more broad, and a lot more investment going into this space as well.
That's awesome. So now you talked before how your main focus with your role is just helping people actually implement some sort of AI. So dive into that more. Is that meaning they're using their own custom version of AI? Is it adopting specific tools? What does that look like usually?
Yeah, I would say oftentimes that there's high-level business initiatives, and really just to accomplish some of those goals, you need to make certain investments. And
Yeah.
really smart investments to make is to make some of your tools a lot more sophisticated, a lot better. You see a lot of just technology investments, and those technology investments inevitably are just going to turn into AI investments as more technology starts to gravitate more towards these AI technologies. And so it usually starts out, there's some top line business initiatives. That's actually where I recommend people start. Sometimes
No, I
people
love
are
it.
like, oh, there's this new hammer. I want to go find nails. Really, it's better just to start. What are the high level business objectives? And they could be very broad. We want to reduce labor costs, or we need to expand to new markets, or we want to improve the employee experience. And then from there, you can start to drill in and start to quantify, okay, what are the current pain points that exist today? How can we overcome those pain points in order to meet those business goals?
So when So take an example, like for one of the people I'm talking to or working with or people listening to this, they're in some sort of business function, usually go to market. So customer facing type roles or teams, that kind of thing. So basically what you're saying is you'd come into an org and obviously help, which I 3000% agree with you, by the way, about business objectives first, because I think it gets distracted pretty easily from there. But you identify what those are, and then you decide on using an open LLM model of some kind or some sort of automation piece. What's the steps that once you have the objectives, you then decide on? Are you agnostic to pretty much all the tools? You just pick whatever's needed based on the task at hand, or how do you decide which ones you use?
Yeah. So whether you are implementing a tool internally or you're implementing a tool externally, say you're implementing it for a customer, or maybe
Yeah.
it's you have your own technology that you're selling to customers and you want to create a playbook to go deploy this. Regardless, the steps are pretty much the same. Step number one is you want to make sure there's a really well-defined problem. And I think most people breeze over this a little bit too quickly. When I say define the problem, I'm getting down to the point where you really understand not just what the problem is, but also the why behind the problem. Why does the problem exist? And also understand what are all the different components that are going into solving that problem. The second thing would be, like we've already talked about, aligning on business goals and initiatives. Really, when there is a project that is not aligned to the business goals and initiatives, then you're going to have a really hard time getting success. In fact, most of the time it'll be a failure. And so you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're doing it in the context of the business goals and initiatives. And that's usually not hard to do, but it is intentional. The third thing would be define what success really is for the project and what the ROI should be.
Yeah.
And the fourth would be make sure that you create stakeholder alignment. And I say create stakeholder alignment because it won't happen organically. It does have to be intentional. It is something you need to put effort into. And then the next thing would be make sure that when you're planning out the project, you're set phases and milestones for those projects. There's a lot of different reasons why this really helps with project success, but this is also a very intentional exercise as well. And we can obviously dive into each step.
Yeah. Well, take me through. I think what I'd be helpful to do to dive into each step is to give me like an example. And obviously, you can anonymize whoever it is. But like, if you had some sort of business function, you can pick whatever it is and walk me through what was an example of tech or what was the problem they had. And then what was the steps you went through and the tech you suggested based on the problem. And with in mind that it's not so much to endorse the tech, but more about how you thought about which tech to pick based on the problem. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that one example would be a company comes to you and they say, I want to understand how I can better do budget planning. And then one of the things that's really hard for us today is once we have that budget plan in place, how do we really operationalize it? And so that's obviously a very big, broad problem. There's a lot to dive into there. And so you want to make sure that you really understand, okay, how does the system work today? And what about the system is working and what about the system is not working so well? And that whole process is actually through different levels of stakeholders. You have your executive level stakeholders, you have various stakeholders within maybe a given department that touches that process. But then you also have your end users of that process as well, right? Like those that are actually working within the plan of what you need operationalized. So the end users are certainly an important stakeholder as well. And you really need to make sure you dive in and understand for each of those layers, how does the system look and what is the pain point that you really need to solve for? In this particular case, I think that there's two components here. One was, how do you really make sure that you have a sophisticated way to do budget planning? And there's a lot of machine learning type technologies that can help with that. The next part is, how do you operationalize it? With that, you actually have a lot of cross departments that need to collaborate on the plan. They also need to have some certain automations to make sure that the plan is actually executed properly and get people. And in this case, the end users were actually people that were actually on the floor of the operation. And whether your operation is manufacturing, anything else in supply chain, retail, customer support, whatever it is, you need to make sure that you have a really good way for them to get access to it, whether it's through desktop or whether it's through their phone or whatever device it is that they can be working through. And so there's obviously a lot of automation technologies that go in there, but there's also an automation or an optimization engine that was part of that solution as well.
when you go into place, like there's two different realms where one is you're literally creating. I interviewed a guy the other day where he literally builds AI platforms specifically for people based on their data set. So some are narrow based
Mhm.
on whatever the data they have, and others are massive because they're organizations with years and years of data. Are you literally like helping create their own AI model of some kind? Or is it more of saying, okay, let's pick one of the LLMs, Meta, Claude, Anthropic, OpenAI, whatever, and then adjusting it to their specific use case? Or is it both? Like, which way do you go usually?
Yeah, so for generative AI and generative AI use cases, there's oftentimes that you might have a orchestration in place where you use a
Yeah.
certain model for various different things. I found that businesses are investing in a lot of different use cases. Some are better with different multimodal use cases. So for example, image to text, video to text, or video to some other form. It really depends on, so in that case, you would have orchestration probably in place. So depending on what the use case is, you're using a different model. There's also times that different departments are really just trying to leverage technology in a very different way, in which case that you don't necessarily look at it as a one size fits all. You might be looking to build out a solution with a very specific model because that model is just very good at, say, multilingual in a language that's the target of that business objective.
I know I was perusing the website today, actually this morning, going through and preparing for this. And so I saw different topics. Like one of the things was AI enablement, which I talk about a lot. You have intelligent operations. When people are coming to you, do they, how to say this? Do they really know do they know what they need to have? Or is a lot of it is you're educating them on what's even possible? Does that make sense? And if so, what do you find yourself educating on over and over? Because you're like, people
Yeah.
just don't know this. What is that?
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to working with a customer, and again, whether that customer is internal or external or whoever it is,
Yeah.
it's always that what they should be bringing to the table is what problems they want solved. And they don't need to understand the solutions. They don't need to understand exactly the how that this is going to happen. Really, what's important is you work with them to really draw out what are the problems that they're trying to solve. The other thing is you can't expect them to articulate it that well. You have to guide them through that process also. It's very common that they come with you with a very vague goal. We want to improve operational efficiency. And then you have to be very well versed in really helping them to draw it out. What does that mean for them? What are the main hurdles for that today? And really get down to what, again, that problem statement is, which is step one. If you get down to a really solid problem statement, then usually what I find is that should answer 80% of the questions that you have when it comes to solution design.
Mhm.
So no solutions initially. It's really just getting down to what problems are we solving for. Once you get that really down, it's really done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of how you want to design a solution.
I have a bunch of questions in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of
Yeah.
questions for you because this whole concept of AI enablement thing to me, because this is a topic I've talked about since we started the academy 2 years ago. And it's just fascinating. But it's really cool to hear that you and I've never talked before. But I literally say the same thing like business objectives. What are we trying to go for? And then you work backwards. What do you feel like? I have two questions. I'll start with the first one. What do you feel like are the things that people should be aware of that AI is capable of? And I don't just mean Gen AI, but from a computer vision standpoint or other places to get their brains rolling on different ways that AI can help solve different problems. Does that make sense? Because a lot of times
Yeah,
I feel like
definitely.
people don't even know what they don't know. I don't even, I know I can do this resume with ChatGPT, but I don't know. I'm not saying that. I know a lot of people know it can do a lot. But in your view of being in the world of computer vision for so long, what are the things that people should be considering as a possible use case that they may not know is even possible? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. I think that one exercise to go through is which parts of your business are science and which part of your business is still a little bit of an art. And for example, there's certain roles like relationship building. That's always, it could be supplemented by technology, but there's always going to be a
Yeah.
human component there. Where there's some processes like you need to put reports together or you need certain systems to be updated with certain triggers, and it's more of a science. And right now you have your team operating on mundane tasks. Generally, those are the things that AI can really take care of. And so first part is think about, are there any parts of my business where there is this science and making sure that you're not trying to tackle a problem where it's very much an art. The
Yeah.
second thing is you don't aim to have 100% automation or end-to-end solution for whatever it is that you're trying to to implement. For example, in generative AI, there are a ton of use cases where the solution can bring you 70, 80, 90% of the way. And you need a human in the loop to really take it across the finish line. That's still a major ROI for your business. That's still a major impact for your overall initiatives. And so you don't necessarily need to think that, oh, if I don't have an end-to-end solution here, it's not a solution at all. I think that's actually a false way to think about it. You really need to think, how can I make my team 10%, 20%, 30% more productive? In fact, for most knowledge workers, they have reported that up to 40% of their work is actually mundane, repetitive work. Well,
Right.
if you're making your entire team up to 40% more productive, you're going to have huge gains there. And so again, don't necessarily look at just the end-to-end solutions, but where can I help supplement some of the processes I have today?
What do you think is the thing that people don't, more of a mindset question? Because your 5 steps we talked about before requires a mindset around change that both leaders and individuals have to have, right?
Yeah.
And so what do you look for with clients as far as the mindset around this? Because AI is shifting everything. Like, I'll give you an example. When you think about a sales process and the possibilities of what AI can do within the normal sales process, in the future, what I'm guessing is going to happen is half of it's going to be done by AI, which means the narrow subset of skills that a salesperson have to do will be really good at it because they don't have to worry about the other half because it's done by AI. But that requires this mentality of, I've got to shift how I'm actually behaving within my job because now half it's taken away by AI, which is hopefully good because they can focus on what you like to do. So what do you see that people have to have as far as a thinking around this whole adapting to new capabilities and new things that can happen as a result of automation and AI? What do you think is holding them back, or they need to adapt?
Yeah, I think the right adoption plan can actually help solve a lot of this problem,
Yeah.
because what I've seen a lot is people are aligned on the goals of the business. But when you go to implement a new project, it's not crystal clear to all the stakeholders what's in it for them. And it actually is important that you're able to approach the project from the standpoint of every stakeholder that's part of this project. Everyone down to the end user needs to understand what's in it for them. And you need to also include them in, how do we actually implement this? And I'll give you an example. So one of the things that we have found with some of these implementations, which does really require so many different departments, is instead of launching as a big bang and just launch to all the end users all at once, we would get a cohort of pioneers, what we would call pioneers, where we'd say, you're our group of first users. We're building this tool for you. We want this to help you with these pain points. We know it's a pain point because you've told us a million times and
Right.
trying to help you. So this isn't just top down. This is a tool, you have to use it because the executive team wants it. This is, we're trying to help you. So we've given them the tool, they start using it. And then we ask them, like, you are the pioneer group. We're looking to you to help us design this adoption plan across the entire company. And we want your feedback. We want some guidance. We want you to help us co-design this process with us. And then you go through that exercise, and then all of a sudden you have a much better, more tailored adoption plan. And then you also have influencers within the community of users that want adoption to happen. And so you all of a sudden, instead of having friction in the adoption plan, now all of a sudden you have people that are excited for this project, excited to contribute to the project, excited to use the new tool. And they also know it wasn't designed by someone that doesn't understand them. It was partially designed by their own team members, the people that they work with on a day basis. And so there are several things that you could do within your adoption plan or within your implementation plan to help make sure that you don't run into some of these issues. But in terms of mentality, I think that you just need to be able to guide your customers, again, whether they're internal or external, through a really good implementation plan, a really good adoption plan, and make sure that you have just the 5 steps in place in order to do.
You know what's fascinating about this whole thing is that before AI really came out with the bang and everyone's talking about whatever else, like the concepts you're talking about are concepts that, at least in enablement anyways, we've been talking about for a long time, but it's just being adapted to AI. Like a Tiger team, pilot team is a crucial part of any legacy type tech, is just saying, do you adopt it? Do you like it? Are the people adopting it respected? And will the people listen to them? Because me coming in and saying, hey guys, new tool, doesn't work very well. It's got to come from someone who they respect and admire, know has weight within their same role. So I love that you're pointing that out as something that is a focus. Random
One
question
thing
for
I
you.
will say that is different around some of this more advanced AI technology is it's more embedded across business. And so before, when you would go in and you'd say, we're implementing this tool for the finance department, whatever it is, and you could mainly work within certain departments. Now we're seeing that it's much more embedded across departments. And even if you're working with individual business units, there really is oversight over the investment overall in a particular technology. And with that, you have this additional challenge of how do you keep it focused? How do you define success? And that's why step number 1 of defining the problem and step number 3 of defining success are so crucial there. But with all these powerful solutions, you do end up needing to make sure you maintain clarity and scope, which becomes a lot more of a challenge when you have something like a multimodal generative AI machine. You could do so many things with that. So how do you really make sure that you narrow down on scope? And that's something where I don't think it's the customer's job to do that. I think that is the implementation team's job. I think that's technology providers even need to figure this one out as well. A lot of go-to-market challenges right now with some of these. The most powerful technologies are actually having some really difficult go-to-market challenges right now. And then there's just the very exciting impact that you have there. And so you want to make sure that you have the right adoption plan in place to make sure that the solutions you put out there are actually meeting expectations, and they will never meet expectations if they're not actually adopted.
Yeah. I want to dive into 2 things. One is your step number 3 specifically, but before I get there, going into this whole realm of the future of where we're going, and Sam Altman talked about this with the 5 levels of AI, and step 3 was agentic, and step 4 was innovation, and step 5 was organizational, or I should say level 5. In this world, like it sounds like a lot of it now, which is where a lot of people are, I think in general, is more of augmenting the human experience, the human tasks. But like Boston Consulting Group's come out as well, that it's going to be starting shifting to go from augmented to literally replacing the steps like I talked about before with the sales process. Do you feel like when you come into an org in the future, this is more you probably projecting and just curious on your thoughts. Do you see a world where you come in, apply the 5 steps, but part of that 5 steps is literally like eliminating not necessarily jobs, but at least part of jobs are now taken on by AI on some level? Do you see that happening more and more?
Absolutely. There's different time horizons. If we talk about even the short-term time horizon, that's somewhat happening now, but it's not necessarily the point eliminating jobs. It's more of allowing people to focus on what they want to focus on, which is usually not the things that AI is coming in to really start to supplement. And so when you go and you talk to some of these teams about what would you do with these extra hours, none of them are confused about what they would do with those hours. There's some very high impact initiatives that they're going to be able to do when they get those hours back. And there's no issue there. These tools are much needed. These investments are going to be really embraced by those teams because you're taking on all the work that they don't really want to be doing in the first place. And so I think in the short term, we see a lot of that. I think also in the short term, what we see is AI is not necessarily doing an end-to-end task, but is maybe doing 70, 80, 90% of the task. And hopefully that's the heavy lifting. And you come in more as an editor at the end.
Yeah.
I think in the more medium term, we're going to see the more agentic level, which is not only can I work with you, develop a plan, but I can also work with this tool to execute on it with my authorization. And with that agentic system, pulling me in the loop when needed, really just to give authorization, not to go in and actually do some of the work like you're doing now when we say human in the loop, but really just give authorization and having the right permissions and authorization levels to do that. Longer term, I think that our work can become a lot more interesting. And what I mean by that is a lot of the science that we have in our work today can very quickly be automated out. And so we could focus on the art of what we do, which is usually the part of the job that everybody loves, right? So our work is going to become a lot more interesting. You're going to be able to do a lot more with less. One of the reasons why we don't have a personalized solution for everything is because we just don't have the bandwidth to offer a personalized solution for everything. In the future, I think that's going to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I go so many directions with you, Reuben. I'm telling you, which I love because your stuff you're bringing up is like golden. I have 2 questions for you, and then we'll start probably wrapping it up. The first one is in step 3, and I alluded to this before, but I'm curious on your thoughts. when people come in and they can define the problem, but then they don't necessarily know what the solution looks like or even the consequences or success criteria. And I'm going to take a wild guess that you're going to say, you're probably going to go way beyond this. But let's be conservative. Like, how do you help them define success criteria on a problem that when they don't truly know the capabilities or possibilities of whatever AI technology you choose to deploy? Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's a great question because I would say that, especially if you're a technology provider and you're going in with a customer that they're not going to be good at this. Well,
Yeah.
like your expectation should be that your team brings this to the table. Your team is actually able to help them walk through this exercise of really saying, okay, here's the high level problem. And then really helping them to flesh out how exactly can I get down to a more detailed definition of what this is. And then even beyond that, how can you measure the problem today? Because you absolutely have to benchmark the problem today in order to define success of what success would look like in the future. If they say, oh, I want to decrease my costs by 20%, is 20% of what benchmark? It's very possible that 20% is way undershooting that definition of success. And you're like, actually, I think we're going to be able to decrease costs by a lot more than that. Or it's very bullish based on the way that you're actually defining the problem. And so I would say number one is making sure that you can get the definition of the problem down to the point where you can actually benchmark a measurement of the problem today. Once you can benchmark a measurement of that problem today, if you want to decrease budget, or decrease spend in a certain area, what is that spend today? Okay, now that you know the spend in that area today, what makes up all the components of that spend today? If you're really optimizing on just something that, if you're optimizing a process that only makes up 10% of the spend today, that informs the criteria for success. But if you're optimizing something that makes up 60% of that spend today, then all of a sudden that really informs what your success criteria is as well. And so I would say the benchmarking of what the problem is today and making sure that's a fairly dialed metric, that is a pretty big milestone for you to build your plans around. How well do I understand the problem? How well do I know how I can find this definition or this success? And also, it's also informative in terms of how you want to design that solution.
Yeah, I love that. So what do you find? Because I know your little title is like AI training and human data operations. So it means you have a lot of data, which I love. You may not have this metric off the top of your head, but what's the average, I don't know if it's increased on time, but like, across all the teams you guys have worked with, because the whole point of the podcast is to point out impact over just learning tools, right? It's not just about the day-to-day motions, like what's a bigger impact. What do you find is the average impact of implementing a good AI program in the first year or 6 months, whatever, because you've been doing this since 23? Like, what are you finding?
And so the question is, what are you finding in terms of ROI?
Maybe more, yeah, it could be a wrong ROI because it has to do with the step 3. What's the success criteria and how often are you meeting or beating those criteria? And is there a common theme among those? Is it always time management or always time savings, or what do you find there?
I think it depends on what technology that you're actually implementing. When you have machine learning, then you actually have this accuracy ROI. And so all the parts of your business that benefit from accuracy can really go a long way. When it comes to generative AI, again, the broad scope at which this investment actually is able to bring impact to your organization is much wider because pretty intuitive chat interface. In addition to that, you have a lot of capabilities within just that one investment, and it touches multiple departments. And so I can't necessarily say that it's going to be specific across all departments, but I will say when you start to supplement a team, say a senior engineer, and you allow them to do 60% more work because they're really just a code editor versus a code generator. There's some pretty massive gains there, especially when you're able to actually launch your products faster and then go monetize those products faster. And so you could think of some pretty substantial returns from an investment like that. So I'd say with generative AI, there's such a wide scope because it's implemented in such a wide range of ways and also much larger scales than you would typically see with your average investment in a new technology.
So last question, random, has to do with this topic though. You personally, what is your favorite use case for AI for whatever the workload you do on a day-to-day basis that you can mind sharing? What is that you do?
Yeah. So I guess before I answer that question specifically, I guess one thing I'll say in terms of the use case that I would like businesses to think more about
Sure.
is what can improve their employee experience. And the reason I say that is because there's actually a huge ROI from that. And I think it's also somewhat overlooked. But when you think about retention, having the best talent on your team, getting referrals from that talent, and so you continue to build on that talent monopoly that you're trying to get, as well as just making each team member, again, 10 to 40% more productive, it makes their job so much better. It moves your entire organization from a survive mentality to a thrive mentality. And that just has huge gains. I think it's a little bit underlooked. And I think that it's an area that businesses should think a lot more about in terms of the ROI and what are some of the benefits they can get from this investment. In terms of me right now, some of the areas where I use AI to really help supplement my day-to-day work would be in writing, because I actually am not into long form writing. I'm a bullet point writer.
Yeah.
Problem with bullet point writing is it's not always adequate. And so the fact that I can plug my bullet points into a tool and it can give me something that's a little bit more fleshed out and I can iterate based on that is something that I use in really all aspects of my job, everything from management to updates to communications, and really just help refine communication, which is important. I would say that's been a huge benefit for me because frankly, I find long form writing just exhausting. And I'm getting a lot more work done. I have a lot more energy because of that.
You know what I love about the concept in general is that you said this earlier, is that when you're taking off a lot of the things off of people's plates they never like to do in the first place and really give them the chance to focus on what they like to do, it just makes like the things I'm doing now do require more brain power because it's more creative. But then when I get it done, the stuff I'd have to do to execute on the whatever creation process is so much easier because then all of that's done for me. It's just I wouldn't say
Yeah.
hard, but the fun part of creation that
That's right.
I have to do by myself is the fun part. So all day
Yes.
long, I'm doing the fun stuff. It's a blast.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
cognitive load is one of those things that's a little bit hard to measure, actually, but
Right.
drives a huge impact, especially for those that have empathy for whatever task it is that they just know it's grueling. I think that the whole burnout thing is not a quantity of work problem. I think it's a quality of work problem. You give someone something that they love to work on, they'll work on it for 8+ hours a day and end their day just energized. The opposite end of that, you give somebody a 3-hour task that's just mind numbing and they're exhausted after that. I know I am. And
Right.
I think that is definitely understated in the world today. But I do think that when it comes to burnout, it's actually a problem of not quantity of work, but the quality of work, which AI definitely helps with.
I love that you're calling out the human experience with all this because it does make a massive difference with productivity or quality of output from the work viewpoint, but just from the team culture, all that stuff has a huge output, which I love. I just want to say thank you so much. This has been fascinating. What's the best way people get in touch with you wanted to?
LinkedIn is the best way.
Cool. Okay. I'll make sure I have in the show notes, have your LinkedIn stuff there. I just want to say, Reuben, you've been awesome. Thank you so much. And I may have to have you come back on when the whole agent thing goes crazy in a year now and just tell me what you're doing then.
So sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Cool. Thank you, my man.
Thanks for listening to the GTM AI podcast. Please follow, subscribe, like, comment, and come back for more.